Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be my review of the new RoseCraft Briarpatch jack. And first off, I want to thank Austin at Traditional Pocket Knives for facilitating me getting to check out these RoseCraft blades, and Andy from RoseCraft Blades for sending this knife along. I really like to see more options for traditional knives on the market, and I have had a couple RoseCraft blades and really, enjoyed them. And I know a lot of people, that I talk with have really been impressed with these knives. So I was excited to check out this knife, the Briarpatch jack, because this is the first two-bladed knife from RoseCraft Blades, at least that has blades coming from both ends. So this is a classic cigar pattern. It has equal ends, so you can see that it's the same size on both ends, and it's called a cigar pattern if you're not familiar with the pattern because it's shaped pretty much like a cigar. It's cylindrical, you might say, or like a very long oval, and again, equal sized ends with rounded ends. So the cigar pattern is a very old pattern. It's been around for a long time. It's something that, Case has made in lots of different ways. GEC has made several different, variations of the cigar pattern, the 53 and the 35. I'll show you a 35 for size comparison, but this is actually closer to the 53 from GEC in size. Now, this knife has a really interesting blade shape combination. It has a clip point main blade. I'll move this sticker and box out of the way, but it has a clip point main blade, as you can see here, and a really classic clip point, a nice big clip point. You can see it's got lots of straight edge there, a nice gradual belly, usable tip, and some nice drawn swedges. So you can see it's almost a mix between drawn and cut, but I would say it's closer to a drawn swedge, which means there's not a hard, entry of the swedge there. It's kind of a swooping entry into the swedge. Nice big nail nick on this also. And then the second blade, and I won't say secondary because it's also a full-size blade, is a lamb foot. So lamb foot versus sheep foot. A lamb foot, the angle of the edge to the spine is obtuse. Or I'm sorry, not obtuse, the opposite of obtuse, acute, meaning that the spine moves downward towards the edge. Now, that is in comparison to on a sheep foot, the spine and the edge are parallel. And, GEC made what was called a ram foot and was the opposite. So it was obtuse. The spine went away from the edge. Now, that's not really a traditional blade shape, but it is one that you are seeing more on, sheep foot knives where the spine actually goes away from the edge. But this is definitely a lamb foot, and a pretty traditional lamb foot. Again, the spine goes down towards the edge. The connection between the spine and the line to the point here is a nice rounded corner, which is, fits right in with a lamb foot. And it has also nice swedging here, but I would call this even closer to a cut swedge. You can see it goes right into that swedge with a little bit less of that gradual entry into the swedge. And another, really classic, well done blade shape here. Pretty close to what you would see on a vintage lamb foot blade. And the interesting thing with that, you can see I've got some stuff on here from using it, but the interesting thing with that is that there are not a whole lot of lamb foots made, by American companies. Now, this knife is made in China, but, it's an American company and manufactured in China. So it's a little bit of kind of a mix between the two. And I don't know how many Chinese manufactured lamb foot blades there have been, but some people seem to think, a lot of people seem to think that the first American-made lamb foot was the GEC 93 for Charlie Campagna, the Way North Cutlery real lamb foot. So it's interesting to see another American company putting a lamb foot blade out, especially in this kind of unusual pattern where it is a lamb foot secondary or second main blade on a cigar pattern rather than the more common sheep foot. You do see cigar patterns, equal end patterns with sheep foot secondaries, either a smaller secondary or a second main blade or full size blade. So it's kind of interesting to see the lamb foot, but it has worked well. It's nice to have a nice long straight edge, and this definitely is that. It's a full sized blade there. So it's an interesting blade shape combination, and here's where I want to show you a GEC 35, because this GEC 35, which as you can see is smaller, the Briarpatch is closer to a 53, and I don't think I actually have a 53 in my collection right now, but this 35, the Churchill, has a clip point main blade and then a sheep foot secondary blade. But the sheep foot secondary on this is a true secondary. It's a smaller blade and it's a single spring, whereas the Briarpatch Jack is actually a double spring. So each blade has a full spring. So it's kind of an interesting, somewhat modernized take on a traditional pattern, and there are other kind of, examples of that. So it has stop pins. So you can see in there's a stop pin and a stop pin there. It's a nice thing because then you just don't have to worry about blade wrap. Blade wrap is something that plagues me. I really hate it, and I don't think that it should, needs to happen on knives, and it certainly won't happen on a knife like this where there is a blade pin. It's not something everybody loves. For example, Jack Wolf knives do not use blade pins or stop pins because it changes the way it sounds, and it does change the way the knife sounds. So there is a knife with a stop pin, and here is a knife without a stop pin. Just has a little bit more of a thwack when there is no stop pin. I'll give you another example of a Jack Wolf knife, the sound. So you don't get that kind of thwack or ting sound, however you want to say it, when there's a stop pin, but you also don't get blade wrap. So it's just kind of one of those trade-offs. Now, the other kind of modernized thing about this knife is the tangs, and this is really interesting. It's something I asked Andy about, and he said it just kind of helps them be a little bit more secure. But if you look at this, it's not just a flat tang like you typically see on a traditional slip joint backspring knife. Instead, it's kind of an S curve milled into that, and it fits together. I'm really impressed with how well they can make these fit together, especially for the price range, because it is a little bit more complex a fitment, I would think, than just a flat backspring. So again, I'll show you a Jack Wolf knives, flat backspring, flat tang, and they fit together. So it's a little different, and I would think, kind of a more precise manufacturing process. Now, I'm not saying that this fits together as precisely as a Jack Wolf knife. It doesn't, there's some gap there, but it fits together really nicely. So moving into the construction of this knife, I am super impressed by it. Now, I had the Barlow, the Beaver Creek Barlow that they've done, and I've gotten to check out a couple of other RoseCraft blades, and they've been really well made, but being that this is a two-bladed knife, a two-spring knife, I'm really impressed by this backspring. You can see that there is no gaps on this. Now, the backspring might be a little bit low on the lamb foot, and, it's pretty good at full open, pretty much even, I would say. Same deal here with the clip point. So, it's not 100% perfect in that it is a little bit low. The spring is a little bit low at full closed on the lamb foot, but otherwise, man, look at this backspring. Look at the back of this knife. No gaps, just super well made. And speaking of gaps, there's really no gaps on the whole thing. Now, there might be a very slight gap between the bolster and the bone right here, but that's something that, I see on GEC knives regularly, maybe more so recently, and certainly on case knives. I just made a video on a case knife that had that. And even every now and then on higher end knives like, custom knives or even Jack Wolf knives, every now and then will have a slight gap. So it's something that you just kind of see, I think, especially being a natural material, this is bone, it's something that you might have. But the shield is fitted really well. Now, I actually didn't check if this shield is pinned. I don't see a pin for that shield there, so I'm not 100% sure, but I would think that it is probably just glued. I don't see a pin. It's one of those things, I don't prefer a glued shield, I prefer a pin shield, but hopefully that'll stay in there nicely. I haven't had any issues so far. I've carried this knife pretty much since I got it, but it's one of those things, it's glued, looks to be glued and not pinned. Now, as for the action of these blades, it's really nice. Again, it sounds different, but I would say it's right about a 5 pull, snaps open, snaps to half stop, and snaps closed. It's not the hardest snap closed, that you've probably ever seen, but it does snap closed. Same deal on the lamb foot, nice opening, a little bit more snappy to half stop, and then snaps closed. Maybe slightly more snappy to closed also. So really nicely done, well centered on both of these, and they sit nicely within the frame. So not only do you not have any blade wrap, but there's no proud tips either, which are kind of the two things that I really hate to see on these knives. So really happy and really impressed with the construction of this knife. This knife is like $60, maybe $70 shipped, and that is a big difference between, this and a lot of other knives that might be on the market that probably are harder to get, harder to buy also, because they sell out immediately. So I'm really impressed by the construction of this knife. I think that, you're going to be hard pressed, at least I have been on my, example so far, have been hard pressed to find any real issues on these knives. Now, a lot of people don't prefer those modernizations like the tang interface and the stop pin, but I don't mind them at all. It doesn't really take away from my enjoyment. Is this exactly the same as a GEC knife? No, of course not. It's not made in the USA. Now, there's a little bit of a misconception about how GEC knives are made. I don't really think that they're made 100% by hand with the old machinery 100% anymore. They do use the old machinery, and a lot of it is done by hand, but I think that there's some machine done processes on GEC knives, as well as I'm sure this is much machine done. So I'm not saying it's the same as a GEC. I'm not saying that at all. Don't go in the comments and get out your pitchforks and stuff. But the quality is really impressive. Literally just like the actual construction of the knife is really, really impressive. And I would say, if a GEC knife was constructed like this, I would be happy with it. I would be, excited to see that it didn't have a proud tip or blade wrap, that it didn't really have any gaps. It would definitely pass my inspection from the perspective of a GEC enthusiast. So it's just a comparison for you. I'm something for people who are, maybe are already fans of traditional knives, maybe have some GECs, but are tired of it being super difficult to buy them, or people who are getting into traditional knives, pocket knives, and again, it's super difficult to buy GECs. I think you can get some really, really nicely made knives. If you like one of the patterns that RoseCraft Blades is doing, you're going to get a nice knife out of it. So I've been enjoying this knife. I'm looking forward to the other knives that RoseCraft Blades has coming out, and I appreciate the opportunity to get to check it out. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because the more I get to check out these knives, the better view I will have of their overall quality and construction. So make sure you do subscribe, click the bell, and select all, so you know when I post new videos. Check out my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.